I hate texts. My sermons generally are without texts, and of course they have no terminal facilities, so that it seemed better to prepare something for you, which at least would give you hope that a text on paper comes eventually to a conclusion. So I will try to work on it. It's also, I think, difficult to take a topic that one is given, even as noble a topic as renewal and regeneration from a Jewish perspective. This is a kind of a dream, a vision that really goes into the past and comes out of the past. It's already become transpersonal, but then again, through the speaker and through a rabbi, it becomes a very personal text indeed. And yet, if then it is perhaps this whole vision of the rebirth, one of the archetypes, these have to rise out of the unconscious and become a reality for us. And basically, I have to speak out of a reality, since I am speaking as a Jew after the time of the Holocaust. Now, having tried to say something worthwhile before I read the paper, I can feel a bit more assured of actually looking at the text that I want to give you. I know, and in this group I cannot avoid the definition, that a neurosis can be defined as the suffering of the soul which has not discovered its meaning. But in this case, how shall I define myself as a member of the Jewish community after the Holocaust? In my religious moments, rabbis have them, I can see myself in the manic individuality of a Woody Allen, who draws upon that rich vein of humor residing in the collective unconscious of the Jewish people. It's black humor, it's Galgen humor, but I can see that there is also the witness within my community of renewal and rebirth after every disaster which has come to the Jewish people. It is not the answer I can give tonight. I'm here as a rabbi speaking for religion, confronting that ultimate darkness from which all of us have emerged. And perhaps then both the term Holocaust and rabbi deserve explication of some sort. Rabbis can be understood. One begins with negative explanations, and there are many who do not get beyond the negatives. I think it's a cross that I bear. Rabbis are not holy. They do not, and I will start contradicting my Times piece immediately, they do not have a hotline to God on their desk. They cannot command. They can only teach. And in fact, of course, rabbi means teacher. They are not necessary at a religious service. Any member of the congregation can conduct that service. Then what is their function? They're teachers and scholars and pastors and, despite my Times piece, priests. They are healers. And while I'm pleased to see our colleague from Berlin here to analyze and comment on the text, and I look forward to really coming to meet Dr. Ploud, I must say that I'm sad that Sonny Herman, my friend, the healer rabbi from Amsterdam, is not here. His work consists not only of teaching Judaism, but of working with those who survived the Holocaust and were maimed in a way that requires special attention. And Sonny is a great healer who gives them that attention. Now, having said this and tried to explain rabbi to a certain extent, one thing I cannot do is to explain the Holocaust either to those who suffered inside or outside of that caesura in the history of the world. In our conversation tonight, I must at least try to move towards a definition. All of us have some understanding of what Holocaust, Shoah, Korban means to us, but each understanding tends to differ. In order to set up parameters for our explorations, let me quote at some length from a definition that is in a fairly recent dictionary of pastoral care. Since I wrote it, I feel confident in presenting it. At least it presents some of the things I think. Holocaust, first, is a sacrifice wholly consumed by fire, a burnt offering. Second, a complete destruction, especially of a large number of people, a great slaughter or massacre. That's a shorter Oxford dictionary. Number 3, a contemporary term denoting the murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis, 1933 till 45. The attempt to understand the mass murder of the Jews in our time exists within various disciplines, notably in history, psychology, and religion. The historical approach tends to subsume it under the general definition of genocide, the mass murder of minority groups, characteristic of the 20th century. This blots out unique features of the Nazi action, the criminal pattern of a state which tried to make the mass murder of the Jews a national priority, overriding all other considerations. I mean, trains were detached from serving the front to take Jews to the concentration camps in the last moments of the war. The actual technology of murder, involving not only death camps, gas chambers, carbon monoxide vans, but it's also bureaucracy and reorganization of society, which made the participants of the crimes, guided by mass propaganda and re-educational approaches, demanding conformity with the state, all of the state, which made for a dehumanizing of the Germans as well as of the Jews. Perhaps we talk too little about the bureaucracy. I think the best book in that area is Der Verwaltete Mensch by H.G. Adler, which shows how in a bureaucracy humans are killed as much as in the camps. In any event, there are many attempts to escape through false history the dark consequences of our immediate past, which also link Hiroshima and Auschwitz. As Robert Lifton points out, much of the world tries to dismiss Hiroshima and Auschwitz from human consciousness. In an attempt to do so, this deprives us of our own history, of what we are. In the field of religion, the Holocaust has renewed the discussion of theodicy. How could God permit such evil? Radical theology has linked this with the death of God. Others have come to a reassertion of faith, even in the camps, and have stressed the silence of man more than the silence of God, the right of Jewish survival, and the role of the state of Israel. Again, if we were just to discuss renewal and rebirth, we could just have a talk on the state of Israel, and even if we do not, it must not lie far behind our considerations. In psychology, Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, Bettelheim's work, and Eugene Heimler's teaching emerged from the actual camps. Treatment of post-Holocaust trauma, the survivor syndrome, second-generation anxiety, and guilt feelings within society indicate a continuing attempt to confront the lasting effects of the Holocaust. The impact on literature, particularly the work of Elie Wiesel, should also be noted. Right? That's most of a dictionary definition on Holocaust, and it could occupy us for many hours. It's too much almost to be assimilated. What I say in one page here, I've tried to say in books, And it all ends with a confession that we do not understand the Holocaust. We can chart human reactions, pain, fear, terror, and hope. We can understand that the confrontation with evil is not confined to one group, but is a universal reaction in which the hidden strengths of the human soul come to reveal themselves. Perhaps more than anything else, living in the time after the darkness, we need courage to look at that past and to look at ourselves. Aung San Suu Kyi, the 1991 Nobel Prize laureate, and I have no idea whether that is correctly pronounced, but she says something about it in an essay written shortly before her imprisonment. Fearlessness may be a gift, but perhaps more precious is the courage acquired through endeavor, courage that comes from cultivating the habit of refusing to let fear dictate one's action. Courage could be described as grace under pressure, grace which is renewed in the face of harsh, unremitting pressure. In Burma, she lives under a cruel regime, under what she describes as fear of imprisonment, fear of torture, fear of death, fear of losing friends, family, property, and means of livelihood. But even under the most crushing state machinery, courage rises up again and again, for fear is not the natural state of civilized people. And perhaps this courage to live is part of the spirit of religious faith, is part of the whole concept of rebirth, that nevertheless, after the darkest night when we awake, we can start a new day. Human beings react in the same way to the intolerance and genocide of our time, just as they did in the days of the Shoah. We may call that God-given grace, yet the circumstances are different, and we must not try to understand the Holocaust by looking at the cruelties of our time. Incidentally, we can begin to understand the cruelties of our time by looking at the Holocaust. The fabric of civilization was torn apart then, permitting genocide, turning our time into a century of brutality which has not found its like in the records kept by historians. It seems arrogant to say this in a company of healers who have come to understand how little we know of the human psyche. But we can understand our human reactions more than we can understand the tremendum of the dreadful night that was the Shoah. The fact that renewal and regeneration can be seen in the individual, Nobel Prize winners, our neighbors, ourselves, this gives us an insight which, in my case, is translated into religious terms, which leads me into an examination of the Jewish tradition where it becomes a category of understanding in history as much as in theology. The Bible speaks of those who go down to the darkness, the Yoreh Duma, silent, not praising God, although Jewish mysticism developed this group into a powerful group, riders of the darkness. But there are also those who arise out of the darkness, riders towards the dawn, who affirm life and ultimately can affirm God once more. The names I cited in my description of the Holocaust were Elie Wiesel, Viktor Frankl, Eugene Heimler, Bruno Bettelheim. They establish a paradigm for the rebirth of the Jew after the darkness. They differ widely in their approach. At times they affirm regeneration, but they are still touched by the poison of the fog and the darkness. Alongside of them we can set up Paul Celan, the poet, Primo Levi, the scientist novelist, the philosopher Jean Améry. All of them, like Bruno Bettelheim, eventually drank the dark waters of Lethe, that black milk. They all committed suicide. We cannot speak about rebirth in relationship to the Holocaust without talking about death. All of them all of these men, and they were matched by great women. We must not forget Nellie Sachs, a Nobel Prize laureate, whose poetry reflects upon that darkness in a most illuminating way. All took their greatness out of an experience which maimed and limited them. We do not think of them as saints. That archetypal figure of the shadow, the inferior part of their personality, accompanied them in their journey towards the dawn. That is why we can see ourselves in them and why we can relate to them. We also are not saints. We too are flawed. Renewal and regeneration means little to us if we can't find traces of them in our own lives after discovering rebirth within our old people. To see ourselves as individual and as a people, as that flawed figure in the Bible, Jacob Israel, who limps from the encounter in the night towards the dawn of reconciliation with his brother, is to assert the miracle of rebirth after darkness, of rebirth after suffering, of rebirth after near death. How then are we born and reborn in history and in daily life? We are still the children of the survivors of the Holocaust. That is the beginning of the miracle. We were dead, and we are alive. But when we say this, we already fall into a trap, into a false way of thinking, which I see with due respect to our bishop here tonight, and at least some of the older Christian theology. I've had many discussions in the Sternberg Center with Richard Harris of Oxford about suffering in Judaism and Christianity, and have been greatly instructed by him. But that is why in some ways the old debris that can be part of Christian thinkers is something that I deplore so deeply. We all read our text in different ways. Christians can and do look at the Bible in a different fashion. They see Jonah emerging out of the whale after 3 days as a prefiguration of Jesus after Calvary. They may tend to subsume the death of Auschwitz under the miracle of rebirth and triumph of the resurrection. They can equate the suffering in the death camps with the suffering of their Jewish figure who died so that all could live eternally. I will not argue theology with my Christian friends, particularly when I see the new Christologies, particularly in Germany, of Marquardt, John Baptist Metz, of Van Buren in America, who begin with Auschwitz and come to new insights which unite Christians with Jews after the Shoah. But Auschwitz and Calvary should not really be spoken in the same breath. One means death, and the other means life. And suffering cannot be turned into a myth. It remains a reality, an obscene reality. I recall a meeting where 20, 30 scholars spoke about Elie Wiesel's work, about the story called Night, and it explored the mythic dimensions until Wiesel, who was there, had to stand up and cry, but don't forget, it was real. There was a real child who died on the gallows with 2 other men, one man on each side of him. That's a reality, an obscene reality. We cannot gain a mythic truth out of the death of more than 1 million Jewish children in the concentration camps. They died, and their suffering does not purify us. They were not the first ones to die, nor will they be the last. We should keep in mind this evening how many Kurdish children, how many Vietnamese children have died just this year. We cannot find a theology for it, only tears. In terms of our search for perspectives of rebirth, we can look at the life of the Jewish people in their march through history from one episode of suffering to the next, and we can discover the miracle of rebirth. It still does not give us answers to the cruelties under which we experience the death of our neighbors. It does give us hope for the future, but no solace for the present or the past. We can look at Job or at Ezekiel and can ask with a prophet viewing the valley of skeletons, like Auschwitz emerging prisoners, can these bones live? And then, yes, we can answer with him, Thou knowest it, O Lord. But they did live. And Israel returned from Babylon to the land of Israel and rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple. Again, a hidden theme of rebirth in terms of the state of Israel that rests behind our deliberation. Still, we have to exempt the Holocaust from our historical calculations. Auschwitz was not Babylon. It remains unique, a tremendum which rests outside of explanation and understanding. If we could understand the Jewish people and the miracle of recurring rebirth after every caesura of history, we would still be a long way from understanding the Jew. Would you understand us through our dreams? The dreams dreamt by Moses and Jacob and Joseph and Amos and the prophets, all the rest of them, and Paul Celan and Piotr Ravitch and Elie Wiesel, who had dreams in the night of the death camps and took these dreams outside of that darkness towards a new dawn to instruct us for a while. But can you understand us through that? In the end, they were individuals who perhaps spoke for all Jews, but for no other Jew. Each person we meet is a private mystery, and that perhaps applies as much or more to the individual Jew whom we encounter. And still, in the short time we have together, I would like you to examine the dream, the vision, the theology and the history of a Jew who walked out of the camps and cogitated on the nature of rebirth as he saw it within the Jewish people. And so let me read you a longish paragraph to you from the writings of one of my teachers. Rebirth knows itself to be a beginning, and therefore it never settles in precepts, but moves ever again towards new striving, new expression, new commandments, new hope. In this it lives. Rigid dogmatism and empty need of ownership would cause it to die. It is not often directly experienced in this way and almost never on a broad scale. But one day, out of soil, perhaps even desert, the forces of beginning break forth. They may have been pushed back for a long time and to a great distance. Shells of selfishness, layers of thoughtlessness may have covered them for generations. But then, in a person, sometimes, somewhere, the roots of the beginning stretch forth. The return commences, and the days create other days. Roads join roads, men find men. The person of the return lets others come to him and her. The strength of the centuries of growth finds new existence, becomes history again. A dichotomy is revived through the rebirth. Again, terms arise here that may be familiar to you in other directions. Rebirth can re-establish the spiritual connection with the origin and the original powers, thus giving the community the knowledge of itself and of that which formed it in reality. At the same time, new pathways of formation and development open. New forms, new expressions can present themselves. In such a return, the coming forth out of the depth, out of the beginning and the striving upward to new heights become one. This upward moving is a shooting forth out of the primal beginning. Each conditions and carries the other. each causes the other to develop. This union of primal spiritual powers and the creation of new pathways distinguishes the rebirth both from nationalism and from cultural humanism. The first retards and finally prevents the rebirth, no matter how much it assumes it is strengthening group feeling. The other only simulates it, no matter how rich it may be intellectually. The first nationalism lacks the upward striving. It cannot rise to moral freedom. The other lacks the inner connection with the deepest roots and is without the strength which comes from within. In rebirth, it is not just mind and not just will that is called forth, but the complete soul, with all that it grasps and fills. It has been awakened and led to new life. It is best expressed in the simile of the poet of the return, that is Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, it shall again return and take root deep downward and bear fruit upward. Such is a way of the return. When individuality, a gift from above, has been set into a people by the Creator, it can become renewed and live anew. This may happen in days that seem to be arid, but nevertheless the old strength of revelation breaks through again and again. As such, this people Israel is the great comfort, the great hope in the history of humanity. Perhaps in its rebirth, the only hope reveals itself. Yet even if it is the only one, it would be worthwhile for its sake alone for history to exist. Now, this text was written by Leo Beck, a book called Dieses Volk, This People Israel, The Meaning of Jewish Existence. He wrote the first part while he was in the concentration camp itself. He wrote the conclusion, the section that we read together, immediately upon his leaving the camp, moving towards the dawn of new life and hope. And even if it is a difficult text, it says things that we might examine again and again. In 1939, Leo Beck had brought a group of children to London, but he had rushed back to Germany to be with his flock, the German Jewish community over which he presided, before the frontiers could close. In due time, after a number of arrests, he entered the concentration camp. And so this book was written in the camp, and then in the new light of day, he wrote what followed. He wrote about rebirth and its meaning. He talked about Israel as the hope and comfort of the world. In a way, he saw Israel as a revelation, as a chosen people. I would like you to understand what that means in all its complexities. It is so dangerous a concept that it is generally misunderstood. Chosen people, it implies choosing as much as chosen. It does not mean high caste, but low caste. Let my people go that they may serve me, is God's word to Pharaoh through Moses. Avodim hayinu b'Mitzrayim, we keep repeating, we were slaves in Egypt. It means the acceptance of responsibilities rather than privileges. And if it is a dream of the collective in search of its identity, it is brought up out of the subconscious in order that it may be affirmed by the group in daily life and full reality. This is what makes the covenant at Sinai unique. A people is confronted by a quality which is present in every individual and which can be part of the collective, total self-awareness. At Sinai, this becomes formalized through a constitutional assembly, which will enable Israel to regenerate itself by turning to its origins and the reasons for its existence. The Greek Antaeus grew strong whenever he was thrown down to the ground, to his earth mother. Jews experience rebirth by remaining part of the chain of generations. Toldot, generations, is a Hebrew word for history, and by seeing themselves reborn in that way in every time and place. The secret of rebirth for Israel and for its individuals is found in a frightening gift which has been placed into this people by God, a gift which is the central word of the Bible, zachor, to remember. On every page of the Bible and in all ceremonies of Jewish life, this leitmotif accompanies the Jew through the stages of life. We lift up the wine cup on Shabbat and say, Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim, in memory of the Exodus. Zechor ad Yom HaShabbat, we are told. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. But then, I said it's a frightening gift. Why is it frightening to remember the joy of freedom from Egypt, the happiness of Sabbath rest, or the glow of compassion when we are told to remember the stranger? The fact is that tradition overcomes our desire to practice memory selectively. Remember Egypt all the days of our life, includes the nights as well. Remember darkness, remember pain, and remember evil. Zachor Amalek. Zachor Amalek, remember the enemy, whether Amalek's attack on the way to the promised land, or the work of Amalek's descendant Haman, or the modern Haman called Hitler. In the book of Esther, when Haman plans his genocide, he appears before the king to say, there is a certain people in this land who are different. They have other laws, other customs. They must be destroyed. But it was Hitler, more than 2,000 years later, who said it in even stronger terms. And if we remember Amalek, we will also remember Hitler, not as a person, but as a type of a resurgence of the forces of evil that appear in individuals and in society. The traumas of the Holocaust are part of our flesh, and they burn in our bones. We are the rebirth of those who died. We are the generations come to life again. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we read, Dor holech v'dor ba, one generation goes and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. Leo Beck said, you could also read it as, one world goes and another world comes, but the generations abide forever. And that is an awareness which confirms our identity. We are also shaped by the outside world, by those who observe us. The books of Chronicles and Kings in the Bible describe the work of the maskir, the historiograph who stands alongside the king as a magister memoriae and acts as a remembrancer. George Steiner, in one of his many brilliant insights, describes the Jew as a remembrancer. At that point, he refers to our internal tasks as we recall our dead. We do not ask others to pray for them, something which I'm afraid the Carmelite nuns at Auschwitz, with all their goodwill, could not understand. We light our own memorial candles, our yahrzeit candles. But Professor Steiner also sees the function of the Jew who reminds the world of the moral law, who returns to the Christian, in particular, to the Sinai covenant and its universal commandments, which Jesus also taught. Christians cannot fight Jesus or hate him, but they can transfer their rejection of ethical encumbrances to the people of Jesus, a Jew. They can hate this maskir, this remembrancer who is always there to remind them of their shortcomings and who has challenged the inmost mystery of their faith from the very beginning. All of the dreams and visions of religion contain a dark figure at the fringe. We have become that dark figure so many times, that voice of conscience. Why doesn't that dark figure die or disappear? Who needs a conscience? One of the most revealing fantasies of Christendom is a legend of the wandering Jew who mocked Jesus carrying the cross and was told to wait until I return. In a way, it helped Christians explain the constant rebirth of the Jew who lived on while the empires which had crushed them to the ground in the land of Israel all turned to dust. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Greeks, Rome, they all had their day and went into the darkness. Israel, even without the land, endured. And Judaism, triumphantly denied as the new covenant was to replace the old, Judaism still continued. The figure of Cartaphilus, of Ahasuerus, the eternal wandering Jew, he has to continue until the end of time in order to be proven wrong or right. Even the anti-religious pagan nightmares of the Nazis could not let go of that dark image. Christianity had tried to replace the Jew in the pantheon of Revelation when it had been disinherited, where a new Israel had taken over its place. The Nazis had approached that other difficult aspect of Jewish identity, which we have called chosenness. Again, in their misinterpretation, they were the Herrenvolk, the elected, but they did not understand what it meant. Hitler was only Arturo Ui, a puffed-up gangster with empty pretensions, and his 1,000-year Reich was a short moment in the 20th century, despite the unspeakable evil spewed out by that constellation of death. The Nazis wanted to torture the Jews, but it is significant that what they really wanted was to eradicate them utterly from the face of the earth. A sadist hates to let go of his victim. The Nazis somehow knew that the Jews were not only the victim, but far more the opponent. Even in their silence, sometimes especially in that silence, the Jews continued as an unacceptable challenge to evil.